morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out. As you know, one of the most important things in city government is transparency. And in no office in city government, perhaps, is transparency more important than in the office of the controller. And so it is with great alarm yesterday when we saw posted the story about the attempts by a local community newspaper, the Los Rios Community News, to obtain the public calendars through a public records request of the controller in Los Angeles. It took 5 months, 15 contacts, and reportedly 5 PRAs to get these calendars. Now, once you review the calendars, and I certainly would suggest that you all do so, you will see perhaps the reason that we have had such delay from the controller's office. At first glance at these calendars, one of the most alarming things that you see is this constant stream all day long of event after event after event after event. These meetings after meetings after meetings that don't appear to be related to anything that the chief accounting officer of the city of Los Angeles will be doing, particularly at a time when the city is on the brink of bankruptcy. So you have to look a little closer. And when you look a little closer, you will see that in fact, campaign staff, people that, or let me correct that, controller city staff, people that are indeed working in the controller's office, are doing work during business hours according to the calendars, her own calendars that were produced in the Public Records Act request. Her own calendars show that controller staff are doing work in campaign-related events. We've summarized these events for all of you in a separate document. Now, this pattern, and it shows to be a pattern, and believe me, there are hundreds of pages. We've only gotten through some of them, of course. But this pattern actually rang true again just yesterday. Just yesterday, I was at a meeting with the LA Area Chamber. It was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The meeting was called by the Los Angeles Area Chamber, and it was called for the purposes of producing polling data that they had commissioned related to the LAX expansion. And the only invitees to that meeting were mayoral candidates and their campaign staffs. I showed up, as did one other candidate, but staffers from other campaigns were there. Across the room, I saw a woman who I'd seen before but did not recognize her as someone who was a Wendy Greuel campaign staffer. You know, we spend a lot of time together in debates, so we get an idea of who the staffers are. And I introduced myself, and come to find out that she was the Chief Deputy Controller of the City of Los Angeles, sitting in a meeting that was purely for polling data related directly to the mayor's race. I obtained her card. I have her card. Her card is part of the press packet for you as well. So not only is this pattern that we see going back of the controller using the controller's office essentially as a front, it appears from these calendars, for her campaign office. Just the fact, if you think about the beginning of this, just the fact that her controller calendar, which by the way, reportedly was requested because of a tip from inside the controller's office, that the controller was using the controller's office as a campaign front. Just the fact that this controller's, the calendar itself had so many campaign events draws alarm. Then you look closer and you see campaign, that these are campaign events, and you see controller staff at these campaign events. So it is with this in mind, and with what happened yesterday at the LA Chamber meeting, that I am calling on the Los Angeles City Attorney to request a review of the appropriate reviewing agency, whichever that agency is, because he may well have a conflict as a city attorney, of this conduct, of these calendars, and of this activity, because if you review the City Ethics Code, you can find any number of violations as a result of these activities. So, with that, I'm happy to answer any and all of your questions. Thank you. tell you the role of my campaign. A few months ago, I was alerted by the Los Cerritos Community News that they were having trouble getting any kind of answer at all from the Comptroller's office, any kind of response under the Public Records Act. And that information came to me, and in fact, I published an article in the Huffington Post about that very fact. I can't remember what month it was, but it's pretty easy to find if you Google the names. And I published an article complaining that the Comptroller's office, for some reason, is holding back her public calendars. So that was the role of my campaign early on. I did publish that paper.
Have they endorsed you?
Who?
The paper?
No.
James, what sets Wendy Greuel apart from other office contenders who currently hold public office? What sets her apart from President Obama, who spent most of last year campaigning for president rather than serving as president?
A few things, Patrick, and I appreciate the question. First of all, I also call on Council members Garcetti and Perry to turn their public calendars over as well. They're public officials, they're paid by the taxpayer. We should be able to review their calendars too. But it was with Ms. Greuel, the Comptroller specifically, there is a difference. Because even, let's say in this race with council members, Garcetti and Perry, as a council member, part of what you do is spend time in your district, in your community. We understand that. What alarmed us is that Ms. Greuel is no longer a council member. She is the controller, the chief accountant of the city, a city that is on the verge of bankruptcy. And you don't see any government accounting standards board meetings. At least we haven't seen any of those. And something that we think would be interesting. It would be very interesting to take Ms. Greuel, who has obviously through her calendars demonstrated that she's using her controller's office as a front for her mayoral campaign, compare Ms. Greuel's calendars with those perhaps of her predecessor, Laura Chick, who has been and was the controller, not running for mayor. Because I do recognize and will of course admit that there are some things that have to be done in the community for elected officials. But as the chief accountant for the second largest city that is on the verge of bankruptcy, just looking at the restaurant, the time she spends in restaurants would indicate that she's not doing the work of the people of the city of Los Angeles and keeping the books of the people in the city of Los Angeles. She couldn't possibly be doing it unless you were doing it in Chez Noir and Checkers.
Kevin, would you suggest that, is there evidence that she hasn't done her job? What would you point to?
First of all, some of the evidence that she hasn't done her job is included in the press packet. I wrote an article in the Huffington Post a while back pointing out 6, 7, 8, or 9 items of Wendy Greuel's audits that were criticized not by this campaign or by me, but by a number of other people, including Miguel Santana, other public officials that work in the city, and members of the media as well. So that is available to you, number one. Number two, a question for Ms. Greuel, because she often talks about how she's found $160 million in waste, fraud, and abuse. I would certainly credit her highly paid staffers for finding that waste, fraud, and abuse. But I would like to know what the results are of that waste, fraud, and abuse. Because what we see coming out of the Comptroller's office are press releases. Where are the results? Where is that saved money? I often liken it to the LAPD arresting someone and then never turning the case over to the district attorney's office. If you look at what the neighborhood council budget advocates have done in prior years, they put a value on the audits that have been unacted upon from the Comptroller's office. And it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. That's like putting gas in the car and never starting the engine. So you don't get the kind of results that we, the second largest city, deserve from the highest paid controller in the country, certainly on taxpayer time. So yes, the calendars represent that, but even before the calendars showed it, I pointed that out. The calendars simply proved the case that I put forth last summer. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Will you break down the political corruption in City Hall when it violates the Brown Act?
Absolutely. One of when I talk about ending corruption in City Hall, people often wonder, what can a mayor do? Doesn't it take prosecutors to do that? Isn't it the DA's office or the U.S. Attorney's office? And in fact, yes, those offices are of critical importance in ending corruption. But you know what you can do to end corruption in City Hall? All you have to do is expose it. The gold card desk, something that Ms. Greuel's office used when she was a council member. This is a perfect example. City council members that were giving parking favors to their family, friends, donors. You remember the results that the media exposed in connection with the gold card desk. The day after it was exposed in the media, an embarrassed mayor and controller shut it down. And then the embarrassed controller had to admit that indeed her office used the gold card desk. You and I, when we get a parking ticket, we have to pay the fine. People with gold cards didn't have to pay the fine. And that proves my point that all you have to do to end corruption in the city of Los Angeles is expose it from the inside. But to expose it from the inside, you have to have someone on the inside that's willing to talk about it and to talk about it honestly.
You mentioned that the schedule's been requested from Perry and Garcetti. Do you see any problems there with the schedules they've been keeping that you know of them?
You know what, Patrick? I am so busy with my campaign that it's hard to keep up with them. Although we do try to keep up with them a little bit, I will tell you this, just anecdotally. I was at an event, an education-related campaign event, where I saw one of Ms. Perry's education staffers. Now, I don't know if this was a campaign staffer as well or not. It's possible. But that's something that I've seen, but nothing that I know of yet, and I haven't seen the calendars of Councilman Garcetti or Councilmember Perry to know that in any more detail. It's when you look, what was so glowing is what's happening in the controller's office. You know, when you're a former federal prosecutor and a radio broadcaster, you've got some sources out there. And lots of people there was a lot of chatter about the fact that the controller's been using the controller's office as a front for her campaign office. And these calendars, which, you know, that coupled with other issues related to the controller's office, obviously flagged the request that came from the Los Cerritos Community News. Those of you that may not be familiar, that's the same newspaper that broke the no-get scandal, the tax assessor scandal. It's such a big news story right now. And I will offer that I did hear back from the city attorney. The city attorney said that he would review any cover letter with attached evidence that we presented and make the decision as to whether or not it should be submitted to an appropriate agency for an independent review, such as a district attorney's office, a U.S. attorney's office, or a state attorney general's office. He would know the right place for that to go.
That was Trutanich who said that?
That was the city attorney, yes.
And when did you have that conversation?
I had that conversation with him this morning.
Did anyone from the paper contribute to your campaign?
Anyone from what?
The Los Cerritos paper?
Contributed to my campaign?
Yeah.
Not that I have any knowledge of.
Okay. And they also published a pretty critical story of your